Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, to be back. We were inspired by the Triennale's theme, Liquid City. And we have been thinking about systems and how systems can shape cities, but also architecture, especially in light of climate change. We have to reinvent how architecture and nature come together. And so the idea is to almost trace water through architecture. And generally architecture is conceived as trying to let water out. But at the same time, there are very interesting thinkers throughout architectural history who've thought about, plumbing and infrastructure and systems at the scale of architecture. So it's that line of thinking that we wanted to explore through our work and through our projects, through a number of rooms. You want to talk about the rooms?
Yeah, so there are rooms organized by theme, generally going from very small elements to very big elements. So we start with the sink and we end with the lunar expedition. The first room is called Fixtures, and that is basically about reinventing the everyday infrastructure of how we wash our hands or how we gather together, or really rethinking these things. So we have a shower that waters plants, for example. The second room, I have to remember the order. Second room is called in-food structure, which is a word that we invented to kind of remind people that food and the systems of food are part of architecture and part of cities and part of urbanism. And of course, with food, you need a lot of water. So it really looks at different alternate food systems, vertical farming, urban farming, a farm that we built out of cardboard, and even a fish farm, which has very small fish, but hopefully by the end of the exhibition they'll be
very big.
And then the last room on the ground floor is called super plumbing, which is about the idea that water doesn't necessarily have to be in a pipe. Water can travel through a waterfall, or water can become a pond or a cistern, and really thinking what happens when you blow up the scale of plumbing to become super plumbing. So we have a building whose water collection system becomes a waterfall in a garden, and other projects of kind of massive ideas about plumbing. Another building that's almost entirely all pipe. And then the exhibition continues onto the first floor.
Sure, and there are 3 more rooms. The first room is the desert room. What happens when you have very little water and how you can treat that water very delicately through drip irrigation and other. That's explored through 3 projects. The first is called the Arizona House, which is a completely self-sustaining small house in Arizona that collects water, recycles it, composts toilets, etc., etc. So the house is rethinking Le Corbusier's machine à habiter, but the machine is very different now given the environmental sort of concerns. The second project is the Beirut Museum of Art that we're currently designing, and there we wanted to design what we call a very open museum, so almost inverting the museum inside out. So most of the galleries are wrapping around the museum, they're open to the air, sort of hosting gardens and sculpture gardens and a new kind of landscape in the city, and so tracing the water through the facade is very important in that project. And the third one is a library we're doing in Boulder in Colorado, which is not yet a desert. It's really beautiful, it has incredible mountains, but water is more and more scarce, and there's concern about fires, etc. And so we're designing this, the whole building is about moving air and water through passive and active systems. The second room is the sea, so it's almost, the opposite. With one project, the first called Maria, which is a series of villas on the sea, on the Mediterranean Sea in Lebanon. And here we explore a different idea, which is the idea that how can we bring density and still have a sense of the individual and privacy and gardens, and created this topography with the roofs. So when you're sitting in one house, you have a sense of the kind of gardens that meet the sea, and every house is really framing the sea and the water systems there. And there are two projects. Maria is the overall kind of development, and then there's a focus on Villa Papillon, which is one of the main villas we're designing, which is all about framing the water, but also creating a kind of landscape in terms of its own roof and courtyard, and negotiating those views. And then the last room is called the future room, and that's our hope for architects and urbanists to rethink how we live, integrating housing and infrastructure and ecological systems, such as for the theoretical projects we designed for MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, called Nature City, where every housing also performs ecologically and is a kind of system in itself. The second project is 3C City, and that actually is the project we came to speak about a year ago here in Bruges. It's a collaboration with the 70s sort of architecture from practice called Ant Farm, and we revisit there. They had this amazing building called the Dolphin Embassy, which was about negotiating between dolphins and humans, and the idea of kind of engaging with other species, and we worked with them to think about an idea of a big cruise ship that kind of would do the same and would host conventions to discuss climate, and kind of imagining how, you know, cruise ships are also, well, these days they're getting a bad name, but in general they are an incredible model of kind of self-sustaining system, which can become a model for living in some ways. And then Lunar is a kind of theoretical proposal we made. We were invited to think about, you know, what happens if humans start to settle the moon, and our position was that we don't want to, you know, pollute yet another planet, but at the same time maybe there's a way that these two entities, Earth and the moon, could almost collaborate so that one gets cleaned up while the other one is sort of producing new forms of water. So, you know, thinking about water for the future.
Suburbia.
Suburbia. We used to think that the solution for suburbia was to move everyone into cities and turn everything else into farmland. And then we thought that would be a good solution. Just cut out the middle. And we made a test for New Jersey where we moved everyone in New Jersey into one city, Newark, which seemed to have a lot of capacity. But I think over time our thinking about suburbia developed, and we understood that people have some people have a strong desire to both live in the town and in the countryside, and that the ideal version of suburbia maybe is not yet realized. And so I think our project Nature City, which is at the very end, was our answer to the promise of suburbia as Ebenezer Howard had defined it. Like, it was the best of the town and the best of the countryside, instead of being like the worst of both right now. So.
Aquaponics? The word aquaponics or hydroponics?
Hydroponics, hydroponics.
That's another one.
That's again for us very interesting to think about. Take a very sort of engineering system, or and try to find an architectural expression for it, or add program or form, or connect everything together and add ideas about public space and new experiences. I think things have become too disconnected, where the architect does form and beauty, the engineer does infrastructure, etc. And it's only when you reintegrate all these things that you get new kinds of typologies, new ideas about how we live. And so at the scale of thinking about fish, food, plants, and a closed system, or sort of, we're very interested in thinking about that model for architecture.
If there's a word in architecture now, it's about passive housing, passive isolation. Dan and Emma, they prefer to speak about active housing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more we learn about passive, the more active it becomes, because what's really beautiful about it is that you can design a building to completely respond to the changes, even small changes in the weather and in climate, to kind of harness, you know, what's good, like the temperature under the ground is constant, you know, and in the winter that's warmer than the air outside, and in the summer it's cooler than the air outside, and kind of bring that in when you need to, bring in air from the outside, close things off, heat things up when you want it to be heated in order to draw air out, but also to reflect the heat back in the winter. So it is more and more fascinating to us to try to eliminate systems, and on the one hand, eliminate mechanical systems or chemical systems, but to introduce this real complexity. In fact, there's a story about the Mises Crown Hall, the famous modernist building. In the 80s, it started getting very, very hot in there, and they tried all these solutions to fix it. They changed the glass, and they upped the air conditioning, and no one could figure out why it kept getting hotter in this glass building. And then eventually, after like 15 years, they realized that there had been someone who worked for Mises who, up until the 80s, every day or every few weeks would go to Crown Hall and adjust the windows and open some windows and close other ones to keep it cool. And then, like in 1983, he died. And then no one remembered to open the windows again.
The work, but also there is a beautiful connection to what happened before us in space and time, like for example ant farm. Maybe you can speak about Archigram.
Yeah, actually Michael Webb, who was one of the Archigram partners, is one of the first person we interviewed for our book 49 Cities, which looks at visionary cities from a kind of ecological lens. And I think the difference, of course we like that Archigram was, you know, working during the day, and at night they would design these visionary cities, but they never, according to Michael Webb, were so interested in building and making those projects a reality. Whereas Ant Farm, you know, really want, you know, they really believed that, I mean, they really wanted to build what they were designing. And so for us, we want to keep both. We don't just want to be in the theoretical, but we like ideas, but we want to bring the two together. So, and we like those figures, sort of slightly tangential figures in history that are, you know, they're not the central canon when you think about it. But they're interesting for us because they occupy the edges, and they are more rich figures between art, between landscape, between architecture.